in relation to your question about the geography of wokeness, I think wokeness takes different forms in different countries, and different issues will come to the surface depending on the country that you're in. So I think very interesting differences between the US, the UK, and Australia are in the US. I think wokeness very often revolves around questions of race and questions of white privilege in particular, which I think is a fairly nonsense idea. White privilege and black victimhood tend to make up the core of the woke agenda in parts of the US, which is an understandable development from a country that has had numerous racial problems over the centuries. In the UK right now, the flash, we have the discussion about white privilege and racial history and the history of empire. And the woke lobby very often talks about those issues and tries to claim that Britain is an inherently racist country. So that's there. But the flashpoint issue is very often around sex and gender, and transgenderism in particular, which is the biggest flashpoint issue in the UK right now. It's extraordinary, which I think speaks possibly to the freshness of the struggle for women's rights in the UK. So lots of feminists are pushing back against the woke agenda because they feel that the transgender idea is undermining women's rights and women's spaces. And then in Australia, one of the key clashes of wokeness is in relation to climate change and the environmental question, which again makes perfect sense because in the cities in Australia, in Melbourne and Sydney, and among particularly Melbourne, which is like a hotbed of wokeness, they're very green, they're very climate aware, they're very anti-coal, they're very anti-industry. But then, of course, there are vast swathes of Australia, particularly in Queensland, where tens of thousands of people make a good living from coal and a proud living from industry, and who have a very strong sense of being decent working class people. So they push back really strongly against the woke promotion of the idea of a kind of climatic apocalypse. So all of these themes, I think, are expressed in these three countries in one way or another. But I find it fascinating in relation to the geography of wokeness that depending on which country you're in, depending on what the country's history is, and depending on the kind of the class divisions and the geographical divisions in that country, the question of what comes to the fore is different for each country.